Now we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Garimella Subramaniam. Uh, he is a senior journalist. He's worked a lot in the journalism space with different groups, most notably the Hindu, and he's also a close friend of Javed Namu. And we I think been wanting to do this. We've been wanting, this is something that we've been wanting to do. Call Everybody calls Dr. Subramaniam Garry, right? So Garry sir, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And ever since I met you, I think it was in 2019. Yes, we've thought about calling you to talk about Javed Mamu, to talk about the work that you guys did together, and most importantly, your friendship as well. So, Dr. Subramaniam, Garry, welcome. And I think I would want to ask you my first question and get the memorial lecture rolling. So, how do you remember Javed Abdi? Can you tell us about the key interactions you had with?
Well, before I answer your question, I want to thank you, Shamir, and the Javed Abidi Foundation for inviting me, for doing me this great honor of speaking to JAF uh, on the 59th birthday of my very dear friend Javed Abidi. I have a very I had a very long association with Javed Abidi, but I must also say at the outset that I came to know Javed and only a number of years after he actually launched on his activist career or activist path. My very my singular way of remembering Javed is that of a cross disability rights activist, India's foremost, I dare say, first, in fact, cross disabilities activist who inspired thousands of people, disabled people across various impairments, and also innumerable able-bodied people. He inspired people, he educated people on what disability was and is, and how to look at disabilities, how to approach this whole domain of disabilities. And he also inspired the disabled and able-bodied through his very unique style of leadership and the tremendous courage of conviction he showed as a leader through all those years between the early 1990s until his very untimely end in 2018. My very first interaction with Javed was in the summer of 1999. I think it was late April. I happened to be in Delhi, and I was interacting with a few lawyers, and if I remember right, it was Miss Amita Dhanda who, who, who said, who told me actually that I must meet Javed. I had hardly known him. As I said, his activism began in a very big way in the early 1990s, and by 1997, by the 1999, by the time of my very first meeting with him, he was already a very, very popular leader. But I had very little clue about the man when I actually met him. I really had very little clue. I barely knew that the first act on disabilities in India, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, uh, Rights of Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Act of 1995 had been passed, but I barely knew about it. I didn't even know that Javed was really one single figure who had really pushed very hard for this. So I met him at his office, the NCP-EDP office, the Office of National Center for Promotion of Employment for Disabled People. The office then was based in Horse Cars. So I went to his office, I think around during the post-lunch session, and I was ushered into his chamber, and we exchanged pleasantries, and he straight away started talking about disabilities. And maybe because I was a student of political science, and he said, "What does this constitution mean for people like you and me? What is the Constitution of India, especially the chapter on the fundamental rights of citizens? What does all of that mean to people like you and me? What does that mean for people with disabilities in this country, people with various impairments? And how come things have really not moved for persons with disabilities more than 50 years after independence?" So this was the question that he shot at me. And, I must confess that that was the very first time that anybody had posed this whole question on disabilities in this manner, in this very semi-political or rather political and legal terms. Somebody had posed this question to me. That was the very, very first time. And I honestly had no answer, but I very distinctly remember feeling that here is somebody who's actually hit the nail on its head, and saying that, short of saying that, there was very little for persons with disabilities in terms of what has been provided by statute in the 1990s, by the late 1990s. There was very little strength that we could draw from the Constitution. But at the same time, it was very clear, Javed was very, very clear, that the Constitution was our weapon, our instrument for socio-political and economic advancement of disabled people was the Constitution. We are talking, ironically, we are talking today about how the Constitution is the weapon of, millions of people around this country. And Javed was, in 1999, on that day, was telling me that it was this Constitution that was our weapon because of all the promises that were made in the Constitution for the citizens of this country, and therefore for disabled citizens of this country. So that was the message he was driving at. And my interaction brief interaction on that day ended on this very note. So there was a question he posed to me, a rhetorical question as to what the Constitution had actually promised, and the promise had not been delivered for people with disabilities. And yet our hopes had to be pinned on the Constitution to deliver disabled people of their rights under the Constitution. So that was my very, very first interaction. And every subsequent exchange of ideas we have had, and all the campaigns that Javed led, had at its very core, the rights of disabled people front and center. It was non-discrimination, was so very pivotal for each and every campaign that he launched. And I cannot remember any one engagement, any one campaign that he led. Of the hundreds of campaigns he must have led in those 25 years, where the rights, the cross disabilities approach, not the rights of any one, people with any one or two impairments, but the rights of all disabled people, even the rights of disabled people, even the rights of people with impairments that were not recognized under the 1995 Act, were pivotal in his campaign all through those years. So that was my very first interaction, and that remains really my abiding memory. Why I say that was one of my most enduring memories was because I had, as a student in the 1980s, participated in a few campaigns for disabled people. I can't even call it for disabled people. They were campaigns only for blind people. And the campaigns were obviously centered around the concerns pertaining strictly to blind people, and the questions were never posed in terms of the rights of blind people, although those might have been implicit, but they were never so explicitly articulated in those days, in the 1980s. And so this is the first time in 1999, April, when I had met Javed, that I was hearing somebody for the first time articulate the rights of people with various impairments, not just any one or two or three types of disabilities. That was my most, that was my very first interaction with him. And that was the beginning of a very, very fruitful engagement in all those years until 2018. And Javed invited me, he did me the great honor of asking me to serve on the Board of Trustees of NCPDP in 2013, beginning 2013.
Javed Abidi Foundation, JAF, which also stands for Journalism, Advocacy and Fun. Please subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon, like, comment and share.